السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. كتابات أندري فالتشيك نادرة، وصفها المتابعون لا سيما نعوم تشومسكي بالسلاح الذي لا غنى عنه في ترسانة أي شخص يقاتل من أجل السلام والعدالة الاجتماعية، مع الكاتب الأممي أندري فالتشيك ونظرته الثاقبة التي اخترقت الأسطح إلى الواقع من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. هو واحد من أهم المفكرين المعاصرين. هو أندري فالتشيك، روائي وصحفي استقصائي ومؤلف مسرحي ومخرج أفلام وثائقية. ترجمت أعماله إلى أكثر من 15 لغة. بميراثه الروسي ودمائه الصينية والأوروبية، وميراث ديني يجمع المسيحية والإسلام معا، وطفولة في براغ ولينينغراد كما يفضل تسميتها، وحياة أمضاها في القارات الخمس من تشيلي إلى ساموا وكاليفورنيا وفيتنام وكيرباتي واليابان وجنوب أفريقيا، ما جعله يوصف بالأممي. كتاباته وليدة الحماسة، وبلغة شعرية يصف ويوثق الرعب المنتشر حول العالم بسبب السياسات والممارسات الإمبريالية في المناطق والأحياء البائسة والقرى المستهدفة بالمتفجرات والمسواة بالأرض، وكذلك القصور والجبهات الثورية. في كتابات فالتشيك أيضا احتفاء بالثقافة والرقي والتقدم في مناطق أخرى. أنتج وأخرج العديد من الأفلام الوثائقية عن رواندا والكونغو والصومال وزيمبابوي وأندونيسيا وتركيا وسوريا وكينيا ومصر وأوكيناوا لشبكات تلسور وروسيا اليوم وبريس تي في. الذئب الصغير كما يعني اسم فالتشيك بالتشيكية، وهي اللغة التي ألف فيها أولى رواياته نازني أو عثر عليه. أما من آخر مؤلفاته القتال ضد الإمبريالية الغربية وعن الإرهاب الغربي، فهي سلسلة حوارات مع رجل القرن الماضي نعوم تشومسكي. ولعل روايته الثورية نقطة لا عودة التي تدور أحداثها في أمريكا اللاتينية تعد من أكبر أعماله الروائية. كشف أكاذيب الامبراطورية يبقى كتابه الأكثر مبيعاً، والذي أطلقه في آذار مارس المنصرم. وعن هذا المجلد يحدثنا أندري فالتشيك أكثر من الداخل. Andrei Valchik, philosopher, novelist, filmmaker, investigative journalist, poet, photographer, playwright, all these together. Welcome to The Inside, sir.
Thank you so much, Zeynep. It's very nice being here at your show.
It's our pleasure, sir. It's great to have you. You know, a person that embodies all these things together. Well, beginning to talk about yourself, Andrei, you have been described as, quote, a creative, determined voice and witness for those living beneath the wheel of our modern societies and economies. And also you have been described as a true internationalist who does not belong to any single culture, who belongs to the entire world. You have been to over 150 countries. You have lived in many countries like Chile, Samoa, Russia, the United States of America. You know, being through all this, we would like to know, how did you start this journey at the beginning?
Well, the journey was very complicated because I come from the background. My family is actually very complex itself. My mother is half Russian, half Chinese. I grew up in Europe. So if you look at me, you probably wouldn't think so, but growing up in Central Europe, I was a victim of racism because of my Chinese ancestry and all that. So from the very beginning, I actually never felt at home where I grew up. I was born in Russia. I spent only 2 years there. Then my parents took me to what is now Czech Republic. It was very difficult because, but my mother always tells me that, and she's correct. She says, if you wouldn't go through this, you would not be what you are now. So you would not be able to become a successful novelist, for example, because you have to have stories. You have to have a complex stories to tell, and you also have to understand people who are living in the societies as as minorities or as almost unpeople, as Orwell used to call them, and that's of course the majority of the world. And So it's very strange to say it, because you look at me and I don't look anything
So
like...
the journey has started from the childhood.
Definitely. And then I had a very complex journey also because of my grandmother, the dearest woman I ever had in this, on this earth. My grandmother was Russian, true Russian patriot, living in then Leningrad and St. Petersburg, and my mother would send me for every...
Leningrad.
Yes, of course. And then my mother would put me, even as a baby, or as a very young child, 5, 6 years old, she would put me on the plane, and my grandmother would pick me up in Leningrad. She would save money for the entire year, and she would put me through all this incredible Russian culture, from opera to ballet to great museums to literature and stories and all that. So I had 2 or 3 years of dream, and that was actually my real forming as a Russian, which I was not actually. I was born, I was born there. I was taken away at the age of 2. But then all these summers actually created this dream of Russia, repertoire, but also dream of the country, which was until now my imaginary home. It was not really my home, my fatherland or motherland, but it was imaginary home. It was a country which I almost dreamed of, and I never really lived in.
Yes, Russia and Chile at the same time. It's from reading whatever you've written, one can sense how much reverence you have, how much love and affection and attachment you have for those 2 countries. But allow me now, Andrei, to move to a very important thing, which is one of your most recent publications, this huge, monumental volume, The Monster, Exposing Lies of the Empire. The title is very attractive, but whatever is inside this book is also, if you tend to thumb through it, you'll see that it will capture your attention and you want to keep on reading. It was published last March in 2015. It's an 826-page
It was supposed
volume.
to be 1,000, but the printer couldn't print, so they had to reduce the font. So it's still 1,000-page book, but they shrank the font. Yeah.
It's divided into 69 chapters, a very big book, and it comprises a tour between 2012 and 2015.
Yes.
They said that it is perhaps the most complete and most comprehensive account of those last several years. Before going into discussing the details of this book, you talked just about how this thing started, your journey started since the childhood in trying to capture all these incidents, whatever happened to you. But with this book, how did this journey start, and who inspired you into writing this book?
Well, I had to actually, here with this book, I had to separate myself, of course, from the stories that I was going to tell. Let me explain what really happened. I wrote several academic books, and of course I'm a novelist, so I wrote several novels. I wrote some philosophical work, and then I was thinking somehow all this doesn't have desired impact on the people, because people are actually they are not anymore moved by the, let's say, journalist accounts or by philosophical accounts or by academia, definitely not by academia. So I was actually reading, because some of my articles have readership of maybe 2-3 million people, and I was thinking, what really makes articles or essays that I write really loved, or to what people really react? And I realized that they really don't believe any more numbers, or numbers don't move them. They don't believe journalism, but what moves them is still when they hear the stories, when they are approached with something that is warm, that is real. Yes, and so I created totally new style of writing. What I did, I combined everything from philosophy to novelism, to fiction, to academia, because I tell you, I also provide people with the numbers, and I work with top philosophers and academics. But in my books, in my essays, in my chapters, you can hear people swearing. You can hear people screaming, crying.
Yes.
You have dialogue. You have dialogue that you would find in novels. You would find even poetry. And I put all this together, and I used several very important alternative publications, particularly in the United States, like Counterpunch, with which I reached some sort of unsigned agreement that they will let me do all this. And I will keep my rights, but I will be bombarding them with these chapters once, or essays, once a week, and then these essays would be reworked and they would become chapters of my book. So in fact, yes.
Here, allow me to ask you, were the stories in this book, in this volume, were they that authentic, or you added to them your salt and pepper as a novelist?
I didn't add anything, but I just, the form. Instead of, like, if you write as a journalist or as an academic, if you are writing a report, you use a certain form, certain style. You wouldn't start using direct quote, you wouldn't use discussion or dialogue. I use dialogue. I use explanation marks. I use very passionate, sometimes not even very polite sentences.
This is the reality of
this is the reality,
cultures,
yes,
certain people,
yes. So people speak. If you go to slums in Nairobi,
definitely they speak the language of the slums.
Exactly, they speak the language of the slums, and then of course you can calm it, you can make it very academic, but then it's not real.
Yes, it seems that Andre, you've created, as you said, your own style of writing, but is it also a new genre of writing? Like, for example, it's not only a travel kind of literature, or
it's not. It's basically what is happening is that the reason I began writing this, and I gave myself 2-3 years, and this is just the beginning, because in 2 years there will be another book like that. And this is an ongoing process. The reason I began doing this is because I realized that the world reached the state when it is really unsustainable anymore. The dictatorship, the horror of the West's control over the planet, which I witnessed everywhere from Oceania to Latin America to Africa to the Middle East to subcontinent to Southeast Asia, everywhere, that I have to really speak, and I better speak in a very coherent language, and I better influence as many people as I can, because we are heading to absolute disaster. And I'm not being hyperbolic, I'm not being dramatic. It is really happening.
We are living a disaster right now.
We are living a disaster here. When I talk about Middle East, I say there is no Middle East anymore. There is nothing left anymore, and we only pretend that there is something called Middle East.
Right.
We have Africa, which is screaming under the neo-colonial arrangement, where 10 million people that is dying in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, means nothing to Europeans, means nothing to North Americans.
Means nothing to the Arabs too.
Means nothing to the Arabs, yes.
Allow me, Andre, to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we'll be discussing more, some reviews of this huge monumental work of
Thank
yours.
you so much.
You're most welcome, sir. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. عندما تتصفح كتاب الفيلسوف الروسي الأمريكي أندري فالتشيك فتح أكاذيب الامبراطورية، فإننا نجده يرثي الاحتكار المطلق للصحافة، كما يحدد لنا ما ينبغي أن يقوم به الصحفي الأصيل في نقل الواقع، ويشرح كيف واجه هذا الاحتكار للإعلام الذي بات متحيزاً ويكيل بمكيالين في محاولة تغيير المفاهيم والوعي لدى شعوب العالم.
Well, first of all, let me give you one example. If you look at the cover of this book, you see this hand and this finger raised. This was a work of great Australian painter George Burchett. But it's not only he, it's his father especially, Wilfred Burchett, who to me was the symbol of great journalism. And to me, he was perhaps the greatest journalist of the 20th century. This man, father of George, actually wrote the most famous essay about Hiroshima. It was called I Write This as a Warning to the World. He was covering all the horrors of Korean War. And he was actually a very good friend of Ho Chi Minh. So my friend George was born in Vietnam because his father was exiled. He was stripped of Australian citizenship and declared the enemy of the Australian people because he dared to criticize the West. So why am I telling this story? It is because I believe that true journalists should not be afraid. Like Kapuczynski was not afraid, like Burchett was not afraid. Not afraid to lose his or her life, or to get
not
into
only their jobs, but also their lives.
It's not, because real journalism is more a philosophy. It is not really, it should never be just some kind of a job that you do to satisfy your bosses at the newspaper or television station. You have to be obsessed, you have to be possessed with desire to tell the truth. Cockburn, founder of Counterpunch,
Patrick.
Yes, he used to ask new writers who came to Counterpunch, he said, how pure is your hate? You see, you have to love a journalist or an artist or a thinker has to know how to love and has to know how to hate. Those who just satisfy desires of the publishing houses or television stations.
But so you don't believe here in unbiased
Definitely
journalism.
not. There is nothing as unbiased
you either have to
journalism.
love or to hate.
Yes,
There's no standing on the fence.
You cannot be, there is no objectivity. Objectivity in journalism, objectivity in is basically something what the BBC and others created to cover their biasness. There is no...
Like a camouflage of...
It's a total camouflage. One has to be totally engaged. One has to stand on one side, but one has to be honest. So people would know exactly where you stand. So once you really become biased and you claim that you are objective, then you are a liar.
Yes.
You understand? You can be, if you really are biased and you say, look, I am biased, this is what you will expect from me. That what you should expect from me, that's what you will get. Then your readers are not deceived because you are actually telling them exactly what you are doing. Now, bias, by saying bias, I'm not talking about lying. I'm just talking about selecting the stories that you want to write about, that you want to cover, that you want to film.
And turning a blind eye to some other stories, perhaps.
Well, turning blind eye, or for instance, I'm not going to start trashing Eritrea because hundreds of Western media outlets are doing it. Why should I do it too? So I'm interested in really showing Eritrea from different point of view. Perspective, yes.
Sure.
And that's what I'm doing. And how many people actually have opportunity to go to Eritrea and to show the different angle? Not many. So I go to Eritrea as a friend of Eritrea, actually, which I am, or I go to South Africa as a friend of South Africa, or I go to China as a friend of China.
Right.
But it's not that I'm going to do some propaganda work, but I'm going to cover things that are going to show my belief about these countries and so on. So I'm not going to be, propagandist, but at the same time, I'm not going to start digging like the British media is doing for every dirt they can find on China, which I find absolutely disrespectful the way they cover the country.
Right, because this is their approach perhaps towards certain countries and certain dossiers.
Oh yes.
But allow me here to talk about a review by Noam Chomsky. He said about your book, and this is what you've been talking about, Andrei Velchik tells us about a world that few know, even when they think they do. That is because he tells the truth vividly, with a keen sense of history, and with a perceptive eye that sees past surfaces to reality. How did you manage to tell the history of the world through the eyes of those who have been denied a voice in history books?
First of all, you have to be totally obsessed with what you are doing. You have to go. To villages. You have to. If you talk, let's say, about India, instead of sitting in New Delhi only, you have to go to villages,
to the slums,
but to farmers. You have to really understand when they tell you Indian democracy, the greatest democracy on earth. I don't believe India is at all democratic, but how do I prove it? I go to the villages where the majority of people live, and I talk to them how they vote, what is really going on during the elections, and people tell you. The people are very open when they see that you are ready to listen. Mm-hmm. You know, my good friend who passed away, perhaps the greatest Latin American writer, Eduardo Galeano, author of The Open Veins of Latin America, he told me many times, he said, in order to be a great writer, you have to be a great listener.
True.
You cannot really go and just have some concept. And you have to sit down with the people, you have to spend time with them, you have to listen. That's how you get the truth about what's happening near Mosul, in Iraq, or in India, or in Ecuador, or in any part of the world.
Right. Quickly, if I may ask, how can one resist imperial violence, in your opinion, Andre?
Countries have to unite and they have to defend themselves. What Russia is doing next door is very important.
Like Latin America,
Latin America, definitely. I mean, Latin America was always defeated until people like Chavez, like Evo Morales, came to power, and Lula in Brazil, very importantly, no matter what people say, that it maybe didn't go so far as they expected, but all these great leaders actually united, and they said over our dead body would be allowed that one of the countries on our continent would be actually attacked, and we would be just standing and looking how it's being overrun.
Now, to wrap up, Andre, Kim Peterson said about exposing lies of the empire, quote, there are 69 chapters of jam-packed information on the lands of empire and the lands of resistance and the peoples. A book review can only skim the surface of this fascinating work that explores various facets of empire and resistance to empire. This is a book for everyone. Get it, read it, and become an informed citizen of Earth. Find out what our brothers and sisters are resisting and solidarize with them. In particular, people who work within corporate journalism should read Exposing Lies of the Empire and find out what an authentic journalist really does. Andrei Valchik, I'm not going to talk about your titles. Your name is more important than all those titles. Many thanks indeed for joining us on this special edition with you.
Zeynet, thank you so much.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.